All right. Welcome, everyone. There we go. There's Ghost, Ty, and Buzbee. Very excited. This is episode 6 of the Aspec podcast series. It's been a lot of fun so far. We've chatted about all things asexuality and aromanticism, covered a whole bunch of different topics. Episode 5, we talked about Aspec relationships, looked a little bit more into QPRs, and we're going to continue on the Aspec relationship theme. But this time, we're going to focus on demisexuality, demiromanticism, and the gray umbrella. And we've got 3 folks with us here today. So I'll start. I'm Ty Iwai. Use they, them pronouns, non-binary ArrowAce content creator on Twitch here. And I am joined by Buzbee. Do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, I am, like you said, Buzbee. I am a variety content creator. I do Overwatch, Animal Crossing, various cozy indie games, sometimes art, and also co-working on Mondays. I am, of course, a member of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, in that I am asexual, biromantic, non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. And yeah, I pretty much try to focus on just doing a bunch of like advocacy for stuff that's like important to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And you want to introduce yourself, Ghost, a fellow Fruity's team member and the person that also created the Fruity's stream team that I recently came a part of.
Yeah. First off, I'm super nervous because I have social anxiety. Um,
Okay.
um, my name is Ghost Girl. You can call me Ghost. My pronouns are she, her. I do identify under the asexual and aromantic spectrum. I kind of bounce between demisexual, demiromantic, and just clearly just only saying asexual and aromantic. Um, I also identify as bi. I kind of just keep it simple to bi. Uh, yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it.
Do you want to talk about what you do on your channel? You're welcome to
um,
mention.
my channel. I play a lot of RPGs. Um, maybe some horror games. Kind of a little bit retro style, not super retro, but things that I grew up with in my childhood. So that could be things in the PlayStation 2, Dreamcast. Sometimes I do play newer games though. We do have a lot of discussions on asexuality on my own channel. Um, because this is just it's something that I am a big advocate for. That is why I created the Fruities stream team, that I wanted to find more people that were um, focused on giving these kind of awareness to people. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. And over to Ty.
Yeah, well, I'm also Ty, which definitely doesn't make this confusing at all. Um, but I am non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also demisexual and somewhere on the aromantic spectrum, maybe, potentially. Don't know. Don't ask. And I'm a variety, but mostly Pokemon and Nintendo and like cozy game streamer. But occasionally I'll do something random. So variety kind of would cover it, but mostly Pokemon these days. And I am part of the Egg Toast stream team, if you guys are familiar with Egg Toast. And I think that's everything I can think of.
Awesome. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves, everyone. So, as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about demisexuality and demiromanticism. And before we do that, one of the big things that we often talk about in, Aspec circles, and we did talk about this last time, so I'll just sort of briefly remind everybody about it, is the split attraction model.
Mhm.
And so the split attraction model in the most basic form, differentiates sexual attraction and romantic attraction from one another. So they're two separate types of attraction. And so, some folks may experience sexual attraction and no romantic attraction. Some folks may experience both. And, some folks may not experience sexual attraction and may experience romantic attraction. Or might be like myself, where I don't really experience either. I'm aroace. And so many folks, but not everybody in the Aspec community finds, this model of the split attraction model of attraction useful to describe their experience. So that was sort of the original form in 2005 when it first appeared on AVEN, the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. And since then, it's been expanded to talk about other types of attraction, including, but not limited to, sensual attraction, the desire to interact with others in a tactile but non-sexual way. So you can think of cuddling or hugging. Aesthetic attraction, the appreciation of the appearance of someone disconnected from sexual or romantic attraction. And then some other things like emotional attraction, so the desire to want to get to know someone further. And platonic attraction, the desire to be friends with someone. And so all these things together can be grouped as part of tertiary attraction. But we'll go into this in a much greater detail in another episode. But just wanted to kind of briefly remind folks of what the SAM, or the split attraction model, is. And too funny, Casey. Can folks hear me okay? Everybody good? Is the audio okay? I guess I should have checked sooner. Perfect. So the first question I have for folks, and maybe we'll start with you, Buzbee. Do you find the split attraction model useful for your own experience?
Yeah, I think it is, I'd say it's a really integral part of how I explain my identity personally. Obviously, like I said, I'm asexual biromantic, but I refer to myself as a label hoarder. um, I there's a lot of different micro labels that I use to expand upon that as well. It's just a lot simpler to say the two big ones, of course. Like I could go into like the minutia of like my romantic attraction, or like how specifically I experience attraction to like different genders and stuff like that. So it's definitely very helpful for me, because I'm someone that like my brain just works better having the tools to categorize things to actually like understand how I work.
Absolutely. I can certainly relate to that on many levels myself. It's definitely, I've talked a lot about this in the group that I help run locally, and I personally find it useful myself, and I'll go into that in more detail in a little bit, but maybe I'll pass it over to Ghost. Would you like to maybe talk a little bit about, whether or not you find the SAM useful for your own experience?
I think I find it useful. Um, I don't like look at it a whole lot. I was trying to look for an example of it right before stream, but um I think so. I mean, it's a little bit hard because like I am bi. I do think that I'm attracted to just about anybody, but I don't really think of it as on this attraction model. I think, sorry if I'm like not explaining this completely correctly, but it's just that I think demisexual and demiromantic really took hold for me because um when I was younger I did realize I was experiencing attraction for just about anybody. But it was very like low. Um but when I realized it was asexual and aromantic, to not have attraction to anyone, but learning about demisexual, that felt more more accurate to my experience. Um, but if I am bringing this to the attention of other people, I definitely do like share the split attraction model with them, and definitely, I definitely tell people about sensual attraction, aesthetic attraction, platonic, on all of those, because those are things that people don't really think about when they're thinking about attraction. They usually kind of group it up all in one thing, and they're thinking that they find someone attraction. They find someone attractive, but they automatically assume that it might be romantic, and it might not be. So it's very important to realize what kind of attraction that you are feeling, and I think it's important to kind of educate people on that. Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely, definitely. And, I think I've had many people mention to me, who are, ace, that for them, they've experienced aesthetic attraction and wondered, is this sexual attraction? And it absolutely is not. And so, a lot of people get that, confused. So totally can relate, and definitely brought up some very good points. Hi, or self-titled, so we don't confuse folks in the chat. Do you want to mention, how you feel about the split attraction model?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely, I agree with what Buzbee and Ghost said. I think going off of what Ghost said at the very end about like the other types of attraction is what I was going to sort of add to, is that the split attraction model, like on its own, just saying that like yes, romantic attraction and sexual attraction are two different things, is all well and good until you're like 13 years old and you have no idea what romantic attraction is and no idea what sexual attraction is, and you don't know if you're having crushes on people in school or if you're just like you just want to be friends with them. And then when you're also queer on top of that, like my experience was being identified female at birth, and then as I got older, starting to feel attraction, maybe what kind, who knows, towards like other girls rather than like guys. So it was like, okay, well that's gay, right? But then it was like, but I don't know what this is. And I think that having the like sexual versus sensual versus romantic versus platonic versus aesthetic and all of that was much more helpful, because I was able to kind of break it down a little bit more, because I think in my head at that time it was like anything that's not sexual attraction is going to be romantic attraction unless it's like just friendship. If it's not platonic and it's not sexual, it must be romantic attraction. And that's obviously not the case. And I think figuring that out really kind of like broke the ice for me, and I realized that there was like more going on, because I would find boys aesthetically attractive and be like, "Oh yeah, no, he's handsome," but like I don't want him anywhere near me. I just like to look at him. And so it's like, is that a crush? No, yes, I don't know. And I think it was, it's hard to figure out all of those things about yourself at once, then to also realize that I'm non-binary and not a girl, and then, figure out that I identified as demisexual and still do since I was probably like, maybe 15. And it wasn't until literally like the last couple of years that I even considered I could also be on the aromantic spectrum, because I was like, well, no, like I experience romantic attraction at a normal and regular, intensity and oftenness. And then I was like, is that true? Like, maybe not, because I think it took a little while for me to feel romantic attraction. I would feel like, say that I saw a person on the street and I was like, you aesthetically attractive, but that's not a crush. I don't want to date you. I just find you aesthetically attractive. But then I get to know you and we hang out and we're talking and we could become friends. Platonic attraction. Great. Nailed it. Now we're friends. And then, like a year into friendship, I'm like, oh no, they're attractive, romantically attractive. And so I'm like, but that's everybody, right? That's how everybody goes through friendship, right? Everyone only has crushes on their closest, bestest friends. Oh no, you guys are developing crushes at a faster pace? And then it was like, I think that was really when I realized that, romantic attraction isn't what I thought it was, and that like aesthetic attraction and platonic attraction happened for me first, and then after that close bond, I hit that romantic attraction point, and I'm like, oh, that's not demisexual, babes. That's demiromantic.
Absolutely. And you brought up some really good points that, really lead us kind of, into question 4, where we really delve into, how are demisexuality and demiromanticism different from the alloromantic, allosexual experience, with allosexual and alloromantic being, folks that experience, the normal or whatever is considered normal sexual attraction, or alloromantic being that, you experience what, society would, I guess, call normal romantic attraction, right, whatever that happens to be. Personally, as somebody that uses the WTF or what the fuck romantic label, I don't know what that is, but definitely some good points brought up. And so just to remind folks, demisexuals only, as Ty mentioned, feel sexual attraction after forming a close emotional bond with someone. Prior to that, no sexual attraction. That is the key. And similarly, demiromantic folks only feel romantic attraction after forming, a close emotional bond with someone. Demiromanticism, as we talked about, is not the same as demisexual, because romantic attraction and sexual attraction are not the same. You might be both, you might be neither, but they're different labels, they're different identities. So keep that in mind as we kind of talk through this today. Demisexuality is not simply choosing not to have sex. This is one of the most infuriating misconceptions I've come across, and unfortunately it leads to a lot of erasure in communities, unfortunately. Welcome on in, Chonk Witch. Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming out today. Also, hello to the Real Rascally Grandpa, both fellow Fruity team members. To give you a shout out.
It's good to see y'all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today. All lovely to see everybody here today. So, we've talked about, what are the definitions of demisexuality and demiromanticism. We also acknowledge, that, the demi experience. So here's where it gets a little bit complicated. So we have something called the asexual umbrella, and it's a bunch of kind of different labels or experiences that fall under asexuality as a whole. And usually these are, any kind of experience that is limited to no sexual attraction. Obviously, with demisexuality, if you're only experiencing, limited to no sex, if you're only experiencing sexual attraction after a close emotional bond has formed, that's a very good kind of example of limited sexual attraction. Similarly, demiromantic, is a case of limited romantic attraction. So you could say that this falls under the gray umbrella of sexuality or, asexuality or aromanticism. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Gray ace and gray romantic are also labels unto themselves. So there's the gray umbrella, but we also have gray aces like myself and gray romantics. And so the difference here is that gray aces experience infrequent or weak sexual attraction. But the key is that they do not need to form necessarily a close emotional bond. So the difference here is that, there's no requirement of a close emotional bond for gray sexuality and gray romanticism. So hopefully this is making sense. I know it's a lot of labels, a lot of terms being thrown around, but it's also, I think, important to understand that there's a whole bunch of different experiences that fall under kind of that gray umbrella of asexuality and aromanticism. So it's important to talk about kind of how these differ and how they, relate or are different to one another. So myself, I identify as gray ace. I experience, infrequent sexual attraction, but I don't need necessarily a close emotional bond for those infrequent, cases to occur. So I don't identify myself as demi. Personally, I'm not gray romantics. For me, I actually don't think I've ever experienced romantic attraction, and I don't actually know what romantic attraction is. That's why I tend to myself use the what the fuck romantic label, which I think is also great because you can just say, oh yeah, WTF romantic. It's quite a funny label. But I would like to open it up to the folks in the podcast here to talk about their experiences. And I know, Buzbee, you don't necessarily, identify as demi, so I won't necessarily ask you. We'll maybe start with Ghost Girl. How would you describe demisexuality and demiromanticism from your own experiences? And, what are some common misconceptions about demisexuality and demiromanticism that you might be able to, that you can think of?
Okay. I could talk about demisexual quite a bit with my own experiences and what I have read. I read the book The Invisible Orientation, an introduction to asexuality by Julia Decker, and that really helped me figure out more about demisexual.
Mm-hmm.
And that the way that they described it really helps folks that may think that they might like label themselves demi just because they want to tell people, oh, I just don't have sex unless I'm in a relationship, or I just don't hook up. And that's not necessarily what demisexual means. It's about attraction, not whether you're having sex or not. So in the book, when it describes it, there's primary attraction and then there's secondary attraction. Primary attraction is going to be like what you physically see, like sexual attraction, let's say. And I would say typically most people have that. They're allosexual. But everyone has secondary attraction. This is why people think that, they get confused and call us normal. And demisexual is normal, but it's just not typical. So they're thinking that demisexual is typical. And I'm sorry if I'm going a little fast. I get nervous. And the thing about secondary attraction is going to be pretty much anything that is not sexual attraction. It's not what you physically see in somebody. It might take time to get to know someone, for example. And that's the difference between allosexuals and demisexuals. The demisexuals don't experience um, was it primary attraction? No, first attraction, and they only experience the secondary attraction. But allosexuals, they have both. They can experience both attractions. Hope that makes sense. It's the book called The Invisible Orientation: An Introduction to Asexuality by Julia Decker Chunk. It's a great read.
Absolutely. And I
Uh,
believe Julie Sandra Decker also talks about amatonormativity in another book, which is a great term to remember. And so amatonormativity we talked about last time is the assumption that everybody wants to be in a coupled monogamous romantic relationship. And that's a really problematic assumption for many folks in the Aspec and obviously also in the polyam community. So amatonormativity, I'll type it out in the chat, is a great term to look up and, just think critically about, because, not everybody wants to be in a coupled monogamous romantic relationship. I certainly don't. And so, it's something to be aware of. And I think Julia Sandra Decker also coined that term as well. And I think it was another book on, what was the book? I have to look it up again. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're doing great, Ghost. Thank you so much. Okay. Don't worry, you've been doing really great here.
Cool, thank you. I forgot what part of the question was. Like, what does it mean to me about being
demisexual? How can you explain it kind of from your own experience?
My own experience, honestly, when I first saw the word demisexual, it was in Tumblr. And it was before I even learned what asexual meant. And when I saw demisexual, I honestly didn't think that it was like a real sexual orientation. I thought it was something that people just kind of made up, and it wasn't like widely understood. I thought it was just like I don't know, like maybe a fad or something. But when I did see like what it meant, it was about like maybe only experiencing attraction to people like emotionally, I guess. And I thought, well, that's definitely what I am. I just didn't think that that label on Tumblr
it's over
was something like real, and it was related to the LGBT community. Yeah, I had no idea, and I just kind of like disregarded it. I'm like, oh well, that is me, but it's not important. I didn't find it important to call myself that. And then later down the line, I started to experience attraction to other genders. And then I was just getting like really confused and curious. And I went into like a deep dive of like sexual orientations. And I found asexual. And that definitely resonated with me. And for many years, I thought I was just asexual. But the more I guess I dated, eventually there'll be like one or two people that I find very attractive, and I'm like, wow, was I faking it the whole time? Was I not asexual? But what it is I'm not. It's not that I am definitely asexual. It's that I am demisexual. Now, demisexuals can experience sexual attraction. It's just I have to form a bond with them first. And it could be with anybody. Like, people think that you're supposed to have like a type. I don't have a type. It literally could be anyone. If the bond is there. But it was amazing to find out that I was demisexual, because it gave me like a little bit of insight of what it feels like to be allosexual, but because allosexuality confused the heck out of me for so many years. So I have like a little bit of knowledge on what it feels like. Uh, yeah, and it's just amazing how you could have zero attraction to this person for like maybe even many years, and then you start to get closer and have that romantic attraction to them. That's what kind of triggers the sexual attraction for me. And I'm like, wow, you're like a completely different person. But yeah, that's my experience with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ghost. And thank you so much, Chalk Witch, for the tier 1 subscription. Very, very kind of you. Thank you again. Too kind. And Coziest Fox mentioned definitely relatable. My family could not understand why, Coziest Fox didn't have a type. Absolutely. There's a lot of misunderstandings. And one of the most frustrating refrains I get all the time from folks is, why haven't, you might not have found the right person yet. And I want to stop and yell into the void when I hear that.
Yeah.
Self-titled, did you want to talk a little bit about, demisexuality and demiromanticism from your own experiences, and maybe some common misconceptions about demisexuality and or demiromanticism that really, piss you off, that you know of in the community? Oh, you
is
were
a little
muted.
bit like that. Oh, am I?
Not anymore. I unmuted you.
Okay. The idea that like, oh, everybody's a little bit, demi. It's like, oh, I wait until I know someone well before I sleep with them, and it's like, I'm not doing it on purpose. Like, it's not like an active choice that I'm making. I would say that always went hand in hand with, I grew up religious in the church, and that people love to equate it with waiting for marriage, or like, some sort of celibacy thing that I'm like deciding to do. And I'm like, no, you know, it's this thing where it's like, I for most of my life felt like 100% asexual, and identified that way for several years because it was what I knew, and I had never experienced sexual attraction. So I was like, okay, that's asexuality. Check that off. And then it's this thing that like, it kind of hits you like a truck. Like what Ghost said, where it's like, you're just like a different person in my head now. Like, there's like a switch that flicks from asexual to not asexual, or like to allo or whatever. And it's like, and it's different than just like having like libido, or like being horny, or like, it's a whole different like emotional and physical and like weird transformation in your head that you do of this other person that you've never looked at that way in your life, and then they just become something completely different. um and for me, I think something that made it difficult too is that, in my experience with like the switch kind of going from ace to allo, is it's not like 0 to 100 necessarily. It can be, but for me, I think that I never hit 100% allosexuality. Like I think I always live in like a gray area, and that like at most my sexual attraction is still far below like the average allo person would experience. Because even now I've been in a relationship for almost 3 years, and like we have sex. And like it's still the kind of thing where I'm not always, you know, here for that. Like it's definitely something that kind of comes in and out, and I can be like, oh, I feel like I would enjoy that more today than I would on a different day. And like I know that's kind of typical for even allo people to like just like not be feeling it certain days. But I think that like my general base of like sexual attraction will sometimes just kind of dip out, and I'll be like, no, and then it'll kind of like come back in. And it definitely depends on like the person that you know I'm in the relationship with, or whatever. Because I think when I was, especially now realizing that I'm probably like demi-romantic too, is like having the moment where friends turn into crushes or turn into something more, and then sort of having to grapple with that and being like, oh no, I'm attracted to you now and I wasn't yesterday. It's just like one of those things that's so weird, and I don't think allo people really understand what they're saying when they're like, "Oh, well, everybody like experiences that." And I'm like, "No, you're like holding yourself back on purpose." Like you might see somebody in a bar that like, "Oh, you would sleep with them, but you have morals. You're a good person. You wouldn't do that. You have higher standards for yourself." And it's like, "No, I would literally just like look at somebody in a bar, not that I've ever been at a bar, but I would look at somebody in a bar and just be like, sure, you're aesthetically attractive," and then walk away and never think about it again. It's like those are two different experiences.
So true, and brought up some really good points. It's not that demisexuality is you're just holding yourself back. It's literally you don't experience sexual attraction until you cross that emotional bond threshold, whatever that happens to be.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Bunny, welcome on in. Bunny was featured in episode 4 and 5 of the podcast, and we talked a lot about QPRs and got into some really interesting relationships. They're also currently redesigning the Aspec podcast series logo, which I'm really excited about. So looking forward to being able to reveal the final logo. Buzbee, did you want to, add anything about, demisexuality or demiromanticism, that we might not have touched on yet?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Self-Titled was talking about with how people don't really understand the difference between demisexuality and demiromanticism versus like the everyday attraction that they actually experience. And I think that's, at least in my experience, because allosexuals and alloromantics don't necessarily they don't do a lot of self-reflection about attraction, so they don't really understand how attraction works at all. Because to them it's just quote unquote normal or whatever. They don't really think twice about it. So to have someone go and try to explain the difference between, well, I think people think that when people under the asexual umbrella talk about attraction, or the aromantic umbrella talk about attraction, it kind of confuses them because they're like, well, I wouldn't just go to someone in a bar and like tear their clothes off and have sex right then and there or whatever. And they kind of get a little bit insulted almost sometimes because they think you're implying that, because they don't really know how to actually define the attraction they're feeling because they don't think about it. So when people come up and they're like, no, actually this is different, like I don't just look at someone and go, oh yeah, I could have sex with them, they're hot. If you say that, then they're like, what are you talking about? They get like insulted because they're like, they don't think about that stuff. It's just second nature to them. They don't like actually self-reflect on how their attraction actually works. So they get real confused when people
Yeah.
actually try to bring it up at all.
I think you're like shaming them.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, "What? Are you like insulting me right now?"
You bring up some really good points, and it is something that, as a fellow Aspec, I've had to think deeply about for many years. What is attraction? What do I experience in forms of, in terms of attraction? And for me, I've come to realize, maybe, some limited sexual attraction, but I certainly don't experience romantic attraction. And personally, I can't really understand what romantic attraction is from a allo perspective. And as
Neither
you
can
said,
I.
I don't think, everybody, allo folks kind of take it for granted. Oh yeah, this is just, that's what it is. But then when I ask them, what is romantic attraction, they can't really give a easily digestible answer, because I guess to them it's just normal. I think that everybody, regardless of, whether or not they're allo or um, Aspec, should think critically about what is attraction. I think it would really give, it would, I think, help folks better understand that not everybody wants to be in sexual and romantic relationships. And I think it would just, be really helpful from a societal perspective to not just assume that everybody's like the allo. If I don't know if that makes sense. I've gone on a lot of tirades and rants in previous episodes about amatonormativity and allonormativity.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I think this kind of builds on, those rants that I've gone on in the past and will continue to go on in the future.
Yeah, I feel the same way about gender. I think I know it's a little bit off topic, but like cis people often don't think about their gender ever. Like it never crosses their mind that they could ever be any other gender, and they just like they don't think about it for a second. So they just like when trans people try to explain being trans to them, they're like, "What? What are you talking about? No, you can't just change gender out of nowhere." And I think it's the same thing with allo people, where it's like you try to tell them that you just experience attraction in a way that's like not it doesn't come as naturally, like, sexual attraction doesn't come as naturally to me as it would come to an allosexual person. It almost feels like I kinda have to, like, force it by making this emotional connection first,
Mhm.
and they just, like just goes over their head, they don't get it.
So as Duke was, as I think Duke mentioned, and we've all kind of talked about. So allosexual means that you experience whatever society deems a normal level of sexual attraction. Alloromantic is that, you experience romantic attraction at, whatever is considered a normal degree. And, I think there's a variation with that, but within that, but it's basically the opposite of the ace or the aromantic experience. So we had some really interesting discussions around, what is demisexuality, what is demiromanticism, and what are some really frustrating misconceptions about demisexuality and demiromanticism. And yeah, we do. We got two ties in the chat just to add a little bit of extra confusion today. And both ties are non-binary, and both ties play Pokemon. We got a lot of similarities.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah. So this question is kind of moving in a little bit of a different direction, and touching on the term amatonormativity, which is the assumption that everybody wants to be in a coupled monogamous romantic relationship. And that term was coined by Elizabeth Brake in 2011. And I go on a lot of rants about it myself, especially being aromantic. And the other, problematic assumption is the assumption of allonormativity, the assumption that everybody wants to be in a sexual relationship. So both of these, we've talked about in previous episodes how problematic they can be for, the Aspec community. Do you have any thoughts around, why are amatonormativity and allonormativity, and obviously the big term cis heteronormativity, particularly problematic for, obviously the Aspec community, and if you feel comfortable maybe touching on, other communities like polyamorous communities. Maybe, do you want to start, Buzbee?
Sure, yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. Sorry, I stayed up way too late last night, so my brain's not necessarily
It's so
here.
valid.
So basically, I personally feel like it's problematic, because honestly, just on the absolute base level, it makes people feel completely broken. If you don't fit in to all these assumptions, and I feel like allo people don't realize how pervasive it is in society for people to just constantly and consistently push the need for romantic and sexual relationships, and specifically romantic and sexual relationships that fit the mold that society has set out for people. If you have someone that wants to be like in a QPR, it's always met with derision, like, no, that's just friends, what are you talking about? Or if you have people that are in a poly relationship, oh man, don't get me started on that. You end up with people just absolutely assuming the worst, like you're just, for lack of a more softer term to use, that you're just hoeing around essentially, and you're just being selfish, and you're just being a playboy or a playgirl or a play person, and that you're just being promiscuous or whatever. Not that you can be committed to like multiple people at once, or that there are people that are out there that literally don't want anything to do with relationships at all. Like, there are such things as a platonic people. They don't want close friendships. They don't want relationships at all. They're just happy being like solo people living in life. But like, people are constantly and consistently like, no, you have to be in a relationship. Like, when you're like 12 years old, people are like, do you have a boyfriend yet? Oh, do you have a girlfriend yet? If you have a friend, people are like, oh, look, they're so cute together, I bet they're gonna start dating when they grow up. And it's like, come the fuck on. Sorry, am I just swear? I didn't check.
All good. I can definitely relate.
But yeah, it's incredibly pervasive, and people literally, it goes back to, once again, like, allo people just don't do any self-reflection about attraction and how it affects their daily lives, and how assumptions about attraction, because they don't think about it, affects everybody else who doesn't really fit those like boxes.
So true. And Chonkwich mentioned that they have heard, and I think I've heard it myself, that allo folks and folks in cis heteronormative relationships refer to folks in poly relationships as being immature, and that's really problematic and really hurtful and is not at all true. It's merely just a different kind of relationship that doesn't fit the cis heteronormative box. And why does it have to be inherently immature if you just don't find the cis heteronormative, the monogamous relationship working for you? It's not immature, it's just merely a different kind of relationship. And if it's consensual non-monogamy, why the fuck do you care?
Argue it requires more maturity to maintain a healthy poly relationship than it does to maintain a healthy monogamous one, but that's a different rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. Duke mentioned, I wouldn't mind a romantic relationship being heteroromantic, but definitely I hear you on the non-sexual one being, sex averse, ace. Absolutely, so valid for sure. And it's really what I'm getting at is the toxic cis heteronormative assumptions around everybody wanting the coupled monogamous sexual romantic relationship. And if you don't want all of the above, then you're somehow broken. And that is really problematic on so many levels. And I go off on that so much because it's just awful to hear that time and time again. And is problematic for everybody in the community here today.
I did have a question.
Yeah.
I actually do have personal experience with something like that affecting me myself, but it is a bit of a heavier topic.
Okay.
Is that allowed, or?
I would say if it's, touches on anything that could be potentially triggering, just give us like a content warning perhaps, but we can definitely delve into it because it's a completely valid topic to talk about.
Then trigger warning, I guess?
Yes, absolutely. So a trigger warning here.
Yes, trigger warning here. Specifically, I personally have experience with the assumption that if you aren't in a relationship, you just haven't found the right person. And personally forcing myself into situations that were not healthy for me mentally and were actively traumatic as a sex averse asexual, where basically spending my entire life with people saying, you just haven't met the right one yet. You just haven't met the right one yet. Well, if you try it, you'll like it. If you try it, you'll like it. So then I tried it and traumatized myself for years after that because I did not like it. And I know there are a lot of people that put themselves into situations that are actually genuinely traumatic because of these things, of this literal decades of pressure, literally since you're like a little child, like 5 years old, you're in preschool, and people are like, oh, you have to have a crush, you have to have oh, what's it called? You have to have like, you have to have someone you like, you have to have someone you're attracted to or whatever, and they're putting this on little kids, so you're like literally being told from the minute you can talk and walk that you have to like do this thing. And then people hear that, and people like me end up putting themselves in places that are just not where they should be because of the amatonormativity and allonormativity, essentially just being literally like shoved down our throats our entire lives.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry, but that is unfortunately very valid point. That's all you hear. You know, if from the time you're, as you said, you're young, is at some point you're going to grow up, you're going to get in a relationship, you're going to get married, you're going to have kids, you're going to do all these things that the relationship escalator tells you that's going to happen. And unfortunately, we, you know, can get into relationships and get into really toxic scenarios where it's not, unfortunately, comfortable or appropriate for us to be in as, you know, Aspec individuals. And I'm so sorry that's happened, Buzbee. I know that the time I personally tried, you know, being in a capital R relationship, it was not comfortable at all for me. Because I felt like I had to, you know, society told me from the time I was young, and, you know, I was told, yeah, you need to be in a relationship. I constantly get asked, as Sleepy Bunny mentioned, so when are you going to, you know, find yourself, and it's always the cis heteronormative assumption, when are you going to find yourself a girlfriend? And as Bunny mentioned, I usually say I'm still focused on my PhD right now. Eventually that's not going to work anymore, but I just get so fed up with that assumption that I have to be in a relationship. And it has to be sexual. It has to be monogamous. Why does it have to be? And I'm so sorry that, you know, it's caused so much trauma for you, Buzbee.
Yeah, it's it's definitely something that is extreme. Like, I laugh because we cope with things with humor sometimes, but it is genuinely something that is incredibly damaging to people.
Absolutely. 100%. Any thoughts, self-titled, around, you know, amatonormativity, allonormativity, and all the activities, and, you know, how this
Definitely.
can create
Yeah.
problems?
I mean, definitely going off of what Buzbee said, because that was going to be like my main point for this question is like, it's the kind of thing that is being put on you from like a literal childhood. Like I'm talking toddlers where parents just say things like, "Oh, you know, he's going to be a heartbreaker. He's 2." Or, you know, if there's two sets of parents that are friends and they both have a kid the same age and one's a boy and one's a girl, oh, they're gonna date, you know, like they're obviously going to get themselves into a romantic relationship. They're like 2 years old and they can't even like hardly speak yet, but they're, you know, having this pushed on them. So I think that is, I mean, obviously insanely damaging. And, you know, it's first of all pushing heterosexuality onto them because, you know, little boy could like boys, little girl could like girls, or little girl could be a little boy could be a little girl. And then you're also pushing you know, romanticism and allosexuality onto them, assuming that they'll want to be in relationships at all. And, you know, of course, there's, you know, cis normativity is obviously also damaging to trans people. And then even the idea that even if you are allowed to be trans by the society, that you can be binary trans but not non-binary trans, because that's, you know, different. And if you are non-binary, you have to be androgynous, and, you know, all of those things. It's very much the same thing with being in, you know, being ace or whatever. And I felt like for me that I still desired being in a relationship. You know, I wanted to be in a monogamous romantic relationship, and because I didn't know any different or any better, you know, it was just like that's the only thing that I know how to want. And it's not that I didn't want that, because I'm of course happy in my long-term monogamous relationship now, but I had never considered anything other than that, because it's like, yes, I experienced enough romantic attraction that I could get myself into a relationship successfully and be like, great, nailed it. But we don't want kids, and we've talked about the monogamousness of our relationship, and whether we're interested in expanding it upon that, or QPR and like all those things. We're actually like having those conversations now, because I didn't know that you could have those conversations without, because I knew that I wasn't interested in like traditional polyamory, in the sense of like, being in a polycule, or dating multiple people at the same time. I was like, I barely have enough romantic attraction for one person. I really doubt that I could expand that to multiple people. Obviously polyamory is like cool and chill and like do what you want, but like for me as an ace person, I just didn't think I had the bandwidth for polyamory. But like a QPR is like a totally different thing. And I'm like, maybe I could do that if I wanted to. And it's just something I never really thought about. I was going to say something else about allonormativity and stuff. I'm trying to remember what it was. Being like feeling both guilty and lucky at the same time that I'm in a long-term monogamous relationship, because I feel lucky in the way that it's like, okay, I can sort of shut down the people in my life being like, well, don't you want to find a husband or a wife, and get into a relationship and have babies, and it's like I'm doing what society asked me to do. I got into a relationship, and I'm happy about it, but then I feel guilty as an ace person, and for just like like adhering to this thing that I didn't necessarily want to, but just because it worked out. And then like feeling guilty for having a sexual relationship, but being in a demisexual person, and it's thinking like, oh god, can I not be asexual if I'm having sex, and if I enjoy it, am I completely just throwing my identity out the window, even though that's what demisexuality is all about, and you're not any less valid for because when I was younger, I was a like definitely like sex averse ace, like in high school and early college, and being autistic, I definitely have like my own like sensory issues with physical touch and things like that. When I was in like middle school, I didn't even like being hugged by my friends or anything like that. It was like a very uncomfortable experience for me. So I think that, coupled with asexuality, I was like, ew, sex, I don't want to have that, that's gross. And then kind of feeling guilty for almost like growing out of it, even though that's not what happened. It was just I found somebody that I felt comfortable enough with, and attracted enough to be in a long-term relationship where sex is a thing that happens. But there are so many cases where that could have not worked out, and I could have been with a different person, and that person would have been somebody not as okay with my asexuality as Charlie is. Somebody that wanted to force me into something I didn't want to do. Because I mean, I've heard horror stories about people basically trying to like essay the asexuality out of people, which is not at all how that works, and would make it worse in cases like Buzbee, where it's traumatic to have sex if you don't want to. So yeah, very damaging all around.
Absolutely. So many things that you brought up there, and I want to touch on some things that have been mentioned in chat. The amount of sexualization of kids is absolutely disgusting. Why do we do it? Casey mentioned that she said even had people say her daughter is going to be lesbian because she said she hates boys. Why are you trying to label somebody? Why are you first trying to label somebody? Why are you trying to tell a kid that they're something? What the fuck? And also the fact that she's 6 and they're saying that. What in the absolute fuck? I'm so sorry, Casey.
That's the kind of thing that happened to me when I was that age, because before I knew I was non-binary, I was pretty masculine presenting as a child, and you know, for a little girl to wear boys' clothes and hang out with boys, everyone just kind of is like, "Oh, you're a tomboy." But my mom asked me if I was gay when I was like 8, because like, granted, she was correct, but like, you know, it's the kind of thing where it's like maybe we shouldn't be worried about that kind of thing. And then another thought that I had that I didn't say when I was talking a second ago was like how much sex is just in general like sensationalized in media, and how like sex sells is an entire concept in marketing, where it's like if you're making a commercial for your, you know, your makeup product, it has to be like a beautiful woman applying it. And if you're making a commercial for your alcohol, your beer, right, it has to be a guy with, you know, 7 half naked women around him while he's drinking his beer, because that's, you know, what people want to see. And movies are always so centered around, you know, the characters having romantic and sexual relationships, and then they tell queer people that we're pushing it on them, and I'm like, you're pushing it on us. Like, it's so silly.
You think? Yeah. Ugh. It is very frustrating to see all of that pushed on us from the time that we're little kids, and to see it happen all the time. Everything is hypersexualized in media. And
Yeah.
and obviously this hypersexualization of media is what, you know, brings us into these problematic situations in the first place, because we're told from the time that we're little we have to be a certain way, and if we're not, then we're broken or something. And it's really disgusting, really sad, and it's problematic on so many levels. Any other thoughts, Ghost, on this topic?
I have a lot of thoughts actually.
Absolutely.
Um, Before I dive into it, I will kind of give you another trigger warning, because the topics that Buzbee and a Scythe titled had mentioned, um, they do resonate with me, and uh, they're very like traumatic things that happen in my life. So if I'm gonna talk about a few of these things, yes, trigger warning. And I'm gonna turn my camera off. I'll still be here, just we're just not gonna look at me. If I hope you guys are okay. So asexuals do have higher rates of depression. Sometimes maybe higher than any other identities in the uh, LGBT. And I think this does pertain to, you know, this topic of uh, heteronormativity, you know, cisnormativity, and pressuring monogamous relationships on people. And it's been with us from the very beginning of when we're like little kids. And it's not just the adults, it goes with the it goes on to children too, because when I was growing up, I remember maybe elementary school, kids are telling other kids like, who are you have a crush on, and uh, they even they would go around, all the girls would talk to each other like, oh, I got a crush on this person, and I didn't have a crush on anyone. And but like they put this pressure on you. You want to fit in and be normal. Um, and they told me, they're like, oh well, we bet you have a crush on your friend so and so. And I'm like, oh, they're like, you hang out with each other all the time, don't you? I'm like, yeah, I guess so. I'm like, is that what a crush is? I guess I'll say that I have a crush on them. Even though I don't think I did.
I
But
did the same thing in school. Literally the exact same thing.
yeah. Um so there's that, and just having those conversations, and then there is also the relationship hierarchy where monogamous romantic or sexual relationships are more important than any other relationships. Really, really damaged me when I was growing up. And it's like I've had so much pressure on me for years to be in a relationship, to be in a romantic relationship. And if I don't get in a romantic relationship, well then friendship isn't valued. Um like it some folks will like say that they want to date me, but if I don't want to date them, it's not, the friendship is not okay. It's either all or nothing. And it also puts pressure on me to be in a romantic relationship because everyone else is in relationships. No one ever says, oh, it's okay to be single. No one celebrates being single. Everyone celebrates when you get married. Everyone says congratulations when you get in a relationship. Um, and I just don't think that it needs to be so like such a big deal. Like, can we celebrate loving ourselves? Um, and not just throwing your friends away when you get in a relationship too. Um, I tried to be in a relationship when I was like 21, and this was a very toxic relationship to me personally. To other people, maybe it was fine for them, but it was a monogamous relationship, hetero relationship, and my my boyfriend had all these rules on what a relationship was supposed to look like. Um, and you know that says like he put the pressure of having sex. He put pressure of the relationship was more important than my other relationships with other people. Um, and because it's monogamous, he thinks, well, you can't be friends with other men. And when I came out as asexual and bi to him, he thought, well, you just can't be friends with anyone because it was the fear of me cheating on him. And I have later have had like so much um, like learning about myself, and I have finally come to terms with telling people that I am polyamorous. Um, and that's been very hard. It's been very hard to share that with people because of I have a fear of what people will think. Um, I have a fear of being different. I have a fear of them thinking that you're um, just a sexual person and sex is bad. Like you can't please people. It's either sex is bad or sex is good. Like it's awful. Um and hmm, yeah, that's something I've always been struggling with. Um Sorry, I'm kind of reading chat a little. Okay, I'll put my camera on. Thanks for letting me have my moment, but yeah, I don't want a traditional relationship of what everyone like wants. And I want to bring awareness to other people that you can be happy in so many different ways. Um, and yeah, just I'll end it there.
You bring up so many good points. The fact that there is this
Yeah, no
assumption that
problem.
romantic relationships are the only valid relationship, and that if, you know,
Oh, Ty,
once
I
you...
can't hear you. If you're
Oh,
speaking.
yeah, I think they're muted.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I was saying, you brought up so many good points. You know, obviously the assumption that romantic relationships are the pinnacle of all relationships, and that, you know, I've had so many folks get into, you know, romantic relationships and then, well, fuck friendships. You know, I've lost so many friends that way over the years, and, you know, everything's put into this one, you know, bucket of, you know, the romantic relationship. And, you know, obviously being aromantic myself, I don't want, or, you know, I don't experience romantic attraction. Why would I want to be in a romantic relationship? And if I'm not in one, then, well, what are you doing with yourself? That's so problematic. You know, I tell everybody, no matter what kind of relationship you're in, everybody needs to read Andy Nordgren's A Short Instructional Manifesto for Relationship Anarchy, because I think everybody needs to think critically about this and think critically about those problematic assumptions that, you know, we've been talking about here around what is a relationship. You know, what are the, you know, people kind of make these assumptions of what the relationship is, and a lot of them are problematic assumptions, and, you know, communication is not there. First off, all relationships need communication. No matter what kind of relationship it is, it needs communication. And second off, why should we put romantic relationships on a much higher pedestal than all the other relationships we have in our lives? Why do we need to put all our focus on one relationship and, you know, ignore everything else? You know, for folks in the community, it's so problematic. Absolutely. I'll write that out. So Andy Nordgren is the author, and it was a blog written back in 2006 that I think is, you know, it was originally in Swedish and has since been translated. But Andy Nordgren's A Short Instructional Manifesto for Relationship Anarchy. I highly encourage everybody to read it. It's a really short read, but I think everybody can learn something from it. Yeah. So true, Bunny. You know, we've talked about a lot of, you know, heavy topics here. Would it be helpful if we took like a 5 or 10-minute break at this point, before we come back? Would that be helpful at this point?
I think a break would be great.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely. I think it would be a good time for a break. Absolutely. Let me just see, let me just pull up the stream. Where am I? Yeah, so we'll go on a break here. I'm going to see if I can run an ad as well, if possible, to give us a little bit of extra time. Yeah, so we're going to run an ad while we go on break. And what do you think? Do you want 5 or do you want 10 minutes?
I'm okay with 5.
Yeah,
All right,
5 is
so
fine.
we'll come back in 5 minutes. Absolutely. Really good idea, Buzbee. It's been a tough emotional, you know, discussion so far. So I think that's a really good idea. So we'll be back in 5 minutes here. Thanks again, and I'll be back. All right, and welcome back, everyone. We've talked about some, you know, really heavy topics, but also some really important things that we haven't had a chance to really delve into before in the podcast. So I think it's been a really important discussion to bring up so many of these things, because they are unfortunately very common in the Aspec community. So I appreciate everybody being here, everybody, contributing in the chat. We're doing our best to try to keep tabs on what everybody's been talking about in the chat, and thank you so much for your contributions as well. So we finished off talking about the problematic assumptions of Amatonormativity, Allonormativity, cis heteronormativity, and all the ativities, all the assumptions that society brings around relationships. So I think this is a good segue into the question, how does your lived experience as an ace and or aromantic individual influenced the relationships that you've been in? So how has your lived experiences being an Aspec individual influenced the relationships you've been in? And second, what have you learned from being in any sort of relationship about your identity? And so, some of the things that we're thinking about here: how does being Aspec affect the need for communication and the establishment of really firm, clear-cut boundaries in a relationship? And in what ways do you connect, or would you want to connect to people in relationships that are not typically considered maybe socially acceptable relationship standards, not typical capital R romantic sexual relationship kind of material? And we'll start maybe with self-titled perhaps this time.
Yeah, sure. I would say, as far as how being ace has affected me in relationships, I think something that I think about a lot would be my first relationship when I was in high school. My very first girlfriend was a girl that I had been friends with for like a year or so. We like sat next to each other in class, kind of thing. And we were like in the same friend group. We hung out a lot, like in groups, and I definitely thought that she was pretty. Like I thought that she was cute. And because I didn't really know what romantic attraction was back then, I still don't really, but because I didn't really have like a full grasp on romantic attraction, I was like, this is romantic attraction because I think she's pretty and I like hanging out with her. Like that, I've done it. I've had a crush. So I asked her out. We started dating, and she was allo, and I think that I tried to communicate as best I could, being at the time, sex-averse, asexual, demisexual, and being, autistic, but I didn't know that I was autistic yet either. So just kind of like trying to explain that I like don't really like being touched, and I'm not really a big cuddler, and things that we might typically expect to be doing in a romantic relationship that I'm not like super into. And she was like, very nice about that. It was her first relationship too, so we were both just kind of like trying to navigate what being in a relationship is when you're like 16 years old is. But I think that it definitely created friction when she would want to like make out, and I would just kind of like not know where to put my hands or my face or anything in the way that you are awkward when you're a teenager, but combined with not really enjoying it anyway. And I would sort of offhandedly say things when my friends that were in relationships, maybe like I had a friend with a boyfriend, and if they would like make out in the hallway before class started or something, I'd be like, ew, kissing, like whatever. And I think my girlfriend at the time sort of internalized that, and she was like, oh, like you don't you think that kissing is gross, like you think that I'm gross. And I'd be like, no, like I don't think that you're gross. I just like I don't enjoy like physical, relationships. And I think it was difficult to explain that to somebody and to make her understand that like it wasn't that I wasn't like that I didn't want to be with her, but I wasn't necessarily attracted to her, but that wasn't a bad thing in my head. Like I didn't think I needed to be attracted to her to have a meaningful relationship. And still to this day, like I think the line for me between friendship and a romantic relationship is so thin because I have best friends that like, I would give them a kiss, but in a platonic friendly way, but I wouldn't want to date them. And then, it's like Charlie, is my partner, but like first and foremost, I think they're like my best friend. And we had to build a strong foundation and a strong friendship before I had that, romantic relationship threshold kind of get crossed, that emotional bond being Demi. So it was a kind of thing where I had to get to that point and build that foundation. So we were best friends first, and then, in a relationship second. And yeah, I would say the second part of the question was, oh yeah, what have you learned from being in relationships about your identity? And like, yeah, would you connect with people in relationships that aren't typical? Yeah, I would say that whenever I say like, oh, I would kiss my friends in a platonic way, I feel like a lot of people are like, huh? What do you mean? Like, no, you shouldn't. Doesn't that mean you have a crush on them? And I'm like, no, like I would just give them just a friendly little kiss on the forehead. Like, is that wrong? And people, it's like not socially acceptable in their head. Like, you can't just kiss your friends. I'm like, why not? I love them. They're my friend. They're my best friend. I'd give them a kiss, But yeah, as far as like what I've learned about myself, I think the biggest thing was being able to explore like aromanticism and things like pansexuality and panromanticism, where like I identified originally as asexual and then as like biromantic, because I didn't really know about panromantic, and then I learned about panromantic. And it was kind of hard to separate whether I was attracted to all genders equally or if I was just not attracted to all genders equally, because obviously I think personality is a big thing for pan people and for demi people. It's like, if I connect with you on a personal level, if we form an emotional bond, then I'll be attracted to you. And I'm like, is that because I'm pan or because I'm ace or a little bit of both? And then, over the last year, being able to consider being on the aromantic spectrum, which I hadn't before. It feels like a dangerous game when you're in a relationship with somebody that you are romantically attracted to. So it seems like you could just draw the line right there and be like, well, no, I'm not aromantic because I'm in a romantic relationship and I'm romantically attracted to them. But how did I get to this point was like months of not feeling romantically attracted to them and being like, no, you're just my friend. I don't think of you like that. And them telling me they had a crush on me and me being like, oh, no, I don't really feel that way about you. And then going on a few dates and then hanging out more and then making an emotional connection and forming that bond and then realizing that maybe I am romantically attracted to them. It's like that sort of grueling process had to happen first for me to get to the point where I'm like happy in a long-term monogamous romantic relationship, where I never thought I would have been, in that position. And yeah, like Charlie said in chat, they're a big physical touch love language person and I'm very much not. So we had to find where we could connect in a non-physical way for me, but a physical way for them. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing, is just kind of like figuring. Yeah, normalize kissing the homies goodnight is exactly my point, Charlie. I think that, like you should just be able to do things with your friends that people would maybe normally say are only for romantic relationships, and you should be able to do stuff in romantic relationships that people say you should only do with, like who cares? What does it matter? Labels are silly.
And it's also such a Western, North American, Western, Caucasian, European assumption that kissing can only be a part of a romantic relationship. You look at all sorts of, other places around the world. Kissing, much more affectionate touching is often done in a platonic setting. Why does it have to be the case where it can't be a platonic thing here? Why do we have to be, why do we have to conform to whatever Western assumptions are? So, that's another thing to think about. This idea that kissing, cuddling are not part of platonic relationships is a very Western, white, European context. So, look at any other place around the world, that's not necessarily the case. Ghost, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can definitely relate with that. I definitely want to kiss my friends, but I don't want a relationship with them other than friendship. Um, it's just a way of showing love. And
Yeah.
um, I I have a hard time, obviously probably all asexuals and aromantics, like we have a hard time figuring out what is sexual attraction, what's romantic attraction, and what is romance? Because if you ask someone what is romance, everyone will have like a different answer. Some people think it's like, oh well, candles and going on dates and kissing and holding hands. I'm like, well, you can hold hands with your friends. You can cuddle with your friends. You can go on romantic dates with your friends if you want to. I do.
Literally. You can go to dinner with a friend.
Yeah. Um, and that is how I battled being single for majority of my life and feeling left out um by everyone else, right? So I decided, well, if I can't like be in a relationship like everyone else is, why can't I just have friend dates? I'm perfectly fine and like I feel great to go on a date with a friend and it's just friendship. Um yeah, I just don't want the commitment part. I don't want the sex part maybe. Um but that also holds a question like you there's friends with benefits. Like friends can have sex if they want to.
Literally.
So it's a big question. What's considered romantic? Um but my own lived experience as asexual arrow um and influence the relationships you've been in. How has that experience influenced? Um it's made it very hard to date, that's for sure. Um what I find interesting is when I do date people, I I will have like a small attraction to them, to want to get to know them more, to want to be a little bit more physical with them. Um but even in long-term relationships, there's always that time in an asexual or aromantic's life where they, or at least the demi side or the gray side, where we think, um well, am I ace, am I arrow? um because you sometimes have that attraction. um but what's like um funny about when I get in relationships, people will, the people I date will actually tell me, they're like, oh yeah, you're definitely asexual. They're like, yeah, you're definitely um different. And they can tell.
Charlie does that.
Which is like, feels validating for me, but also I'm like, oh, is I'm I'm a little concerned. Is this a bad thing? um but yeah. Definitely the need for communication and establish clear cut boundaries. I've never really made too many boundaries. But then again, I haven't really dated too many people. I can only count two long-term relationships in my life, and those lasted about a year. So we really didn't get to the point of boundaries. Those are both also toxic relationships too. So I can't really contribute to this maybe this topic. Uh,
Your experiences are completely valid, and I really want to hear a whole bunch of different perspectives. So that's 100% valid too.
yeah, I think that might clear up. That might be the end of my spiel.
Absolutely, and that's perfectly okay. And really the whole point is to talk about the fact that asexuality and aromanticism are not a monolith, and there's a variety of experiences under that umbrella that folks need to be aware of. So, it's important to get a whole bunch of different perspectives on this. Thank you so much again for, being so open and vulnerable on, this particular topic.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Buzbee, did you want to add anything on this?
Yeah. I'm kind of the opposite of Ghost Girl and Self-Titled, where I am someone who has to have a lot of like clear-cut boundaries and things like that. And I think that has to do with something to do with the fact that from the actual question title, is that I have learned actually really recently, I just found this term, is that I'm probably something that's known as Adfectual, which can either be a sexual or romantic terminology or whatever. And basically, the definition is an attractional orientation where attraction present depends on one's state of mind. It also describes someone whose level of sex repulsion fluctuates, and like contextual attraction, mind state related attraction, like the concept that sexual or romantic or other types of attraction can be shut off, walled off based on context and not necessarily always entirely consciously. And it's a terminology that is specifically for people who are neurodivergent in some way, such as, autistic, ADHD, or all the other types of neurodivergencies that always get forgotten, like trauma survivors, people with PTSD, CPTSD, things like that. And that has heavily affected my relationship, because I'm someone who I have a lot of sensory issues, and so I'm very, very like touch averse, and my partner is someone who is very, very like physically needy.
Yep.
So there's had to be, we've been together for 6 years. Actually, this is our wedding anniversary weekend. And during that time, we've had to establish a lot of boundaries, and there's had to be a lot of like, we're very heavy on the communication side of things, establishing, making sure that both of our needs can be met and that nobody is feeling, like me specifically, I'm not feeling like massively overstimulated all the time, but that he's not feeling like I don't love him because I'm like, I don't want to hug right now, I'm gonna explode.
Yeah.
And like him being able to feel like that's not a rejection of him, it's something that like, hey, I like it's actually been something that we've like more recently established is like, hey, if you like ask me, hey, can I have a hug, and then give me like a couple of seconds to like, mentally prepare myself, then I could be like, okay, I'm okay to hug you now. But like if he's just like randomly like, I'm gonna hug you, and I'm already overstimulated, I'm like, I will literally physically implode right now.
For sure.
And also like my level of being able to kind of give him the typical romantic gestures and things like that, that he would like, also fluctuates, because I'm someone that struggles a lot with like very extreme chronic fatigue. So if I am like at the point where I'm having a hard time like actually just getting out of bed for the day instead of just sleeping all day, like that makes it to where I lose all interest in romantic gestures and things like that, and it literally just completely falls off my radar entirely, where that's like quite literally the last thing on my brain is like, I don't really want to think about like, are you feeling like I'm being romantic enough with you right now, because I'm like literally so exhausted I cannot explain it and things like that. So I feel like that definitely has a lot to do with the fact that I am a person that is, part of the asexual, aromantic spectrum that's in a relationship with someone who's not. But that can also count for people who are both asexual and aromantic, or either or, where it can be like, I feel like it's a very kind of, as made evident even within this discussion, it's a very person by person, case by case basis. Even if someone is part of the Aspec community, their needs, their wants, their comfort levels will differ compared to someone else. So even if you're a couple, or like a polycool or whatever, and all of you are on the Aspec, your needs and everything could vary like wildly still.
Why it's so important to talk about this from, a lens of intersectionality as well. How do, our different, lived experiences contribute to this? And, for me, I know that some of it most likely does relate to the fact that I'm also neurodivergent. And, for me, I think, some of it very much can be linked back to, my ASD, my autism spectrum disorder, and just not being as comfortable in general with, physical touching and other things that, neurotypical folks may be more comfortable with. So it's really important to talk about it, from a lens of intersectionality. Absolutely. So we talked about, how does your lived experience as, an Aspec individual influence the relationships that you've been in, and what have you learned from being in a relationship about your identity? We've talked about this a fair bit. This brings us to the last question of the day. And this is there anything else you would like to add about, Aspec relationships in general? And, is there, feel free to jump in. Is there anything else you'd like to add generally about Aspec relationships that we've not had a chance to talk about yet?
I think that actually in chat, Chonkwich brings up a really, really good
Yes,
point,
absolutely.
which is normalizing asking for consent in any sort of
Yes.
relationship should be more of a thing.
Yes,
And that's
absolutely.
really, really, really important
Yeah.
in general, but especially in aspec
Mm-hmm.
relationships. A lot of people who are allo tend to assume that they don't really have to ask for consent for things, especially on the more, I guess, sensual side, like snuggling or hugs or kisses or hand holding or things like that, let alone the more sexual side of things.
Mhm.
They just go, oh, well, we're in a relationship, so obviously you already consent, and I don't have to ask you and make sure that you're okay with it.
Not at all true. Not at all. You have to ask. You have to ask for consent. And I think it
Yeah,
should be for
because
anything.
yeah, like I think also if you can hear my dog barking, I'm sorry. But what I was gonna say is like, you know, everything is a spectrum, like literally everything. Asexuality is a spectrum, and gender is a spectrum, and you know all that kind of thing. But it's not just a spectrum from like you know how asexual you are to how allosexual you are, but there's so many other things to consider on that spectrum. You know, like whether or not you're, you know, sex repulsed or whether or not you know, you're aromantic and ace, and you know, there's all of these things that it's not just like, oh, I'm asexual or I'm gray or I'm demi or I'm allo, and that's all you need to know about that identity because it's not like all ace people are the same or all aro people are the same and experience their sexuality in the same way. Like you know just like how Buzbee was saying that they're kind of like the opposite of me in some ways about like you know touch, but I go you know in and out of it. Like some days I will tell Charlie like today's not a touch day for me, like don't touch me, don't look at me. Like you know I'm not gonna cuddle, I'm not gonna kiss today. And then some days I'm actually like I need you to just like crush me into a small ball, and then just kind of hold me. You know like so it's just totally, I think that's probably more of an autistic trait than it is anything else, that I either need to be like 100% touched all the time or 0% touched or you know whatever. But just that you know obviously consent is a thing where it's like just because yesterday Charlie was allowed to give me a hug does not mean that Charlie is allowed to give me a hug today. And you know that consent is also not just like a you know like a verbal thing, it's like there's body language and you know things to consider there. So it's not just like you know, oh well they didn't say no, it's like okay, but if you went to hug me and I went like this, is that consent? Does that look consensual? You know. And even just within like familial relationships, like somebody touched on it earlier, the kind of thing where it's like, oh you know uncle so and so is coming over to make sure you put pants on, is like first of all nasty, but second of all it's like you know you shouldn't be expected to you know sometimes grandmas think that they're entitled to kiss the baby on the cheek, or you know when I was growing up it was very much like okay now hug your uncle, hug your grandma. And as an autistic person that doesn't really enjoy physical touch, it's like I don't want to, like I don't want to give them a hug just because we're related. And it's the exact same thing in a romantic or a sexual relationship or even just in a friendship. Like just because we have a connection does not mean that you have you know the right to touch me or you know whatever without my consent. So you know that's definitely a thing. And just to remember that everybody's in a different place on their journey and in a different place on the spectrum. Like you know I went from being sex repulsed to like less sex repulsed, but sometimes I go back to being sex repulsed. Like it's not like a linear thing where I just you know I got over it and I'm over it now. It's like you know you can still have trauma or other reasons that you know come in and out of feeling a certain way. So just I'd say that's the one thing to remember, is just that everyone's in a different place on their journey.
100%. 100% valid.
So we're ready if I speak?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you might be muted, Ty.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, never mind. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Do you guys hear?
What's
No,
going on?
Ty's muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, go ahead. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
It's all right. Um, um, uh, self-titled brings up good points about like for being in a relationship with someone that is aspec. It is going to be a spectrum. Every asexual person is going to be different, and their sexuality can, fluctuate. It can change. There are times where I am sex repulsed. There are times where I'm sex positive. There are times where I want romance. There's times where I don't want romance. Um, and what I would like people to learn about aspec relationships is if you are wanting to be in a relationship with someone that is on the spectrum, the A spectrum, very important to learn about the orientation and exactly know what it means. Um, but try to get the right sources. Um, I used to be married to someone, and they did really try to figure out what it meant to be asexual. They did want to support me, but when they learned about it, I don't know what kind of information they went and found, but it was not coming to talk to me. And what I had to like explain, like, what you're finding on the internet might not even like pertain to me at all. Every asexual person is going to be different. Um, that's important to realize. And if you want to be in a relationship with this aspect, know that things are going to be different than a allotypical relationship. Um, a little bit, always depends on each person, but um, just expect things to be different. And I'll have friends come to me and tell me like, "Oh, I want to date this other asexual person," or they may already be in a relationship with this asexual person. They're like, I don't know what to do. I need advice." And um, yeah, it's not. This information is not just for people that are asexual. It's for people that may have an asexual friend or significant other in their life. This information is important, and it's nice to have them in like our community to learn, um, and just be open minded and to know that uh, I think it really damaged my significant others to know that I didn't have sexual attraction to them. Um, but like as same thing with like self-titled said, like, but I still like you. Like you are still like the number one like person that like I am invested in and I love. Um, that's important to realize that an asexual relationship is not lesser than an allosexual one. It's just gonna look a little different. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ghost. So brought up so many good points. And I think also everybody should think critically about societal assumptions around what the relationship looks like, regardless of whatever your orientation might be. Because even for folks in allosexual, alloromantic relationships, they're not going to necessarily be the same as what society deems them to be. Every
Right.
relationship's going to look different. So I think just normalizing, thinking critically about what those assumptions are is really important across the board. I just think within the Aspec community, for so many reasons, we've had to do this on a much deeper level than the average allosexual, alloromantic individual. So I think this can apply to everyone as well. So some really good points. And I would like to take the moment to thank Duke yet again for sub-bombing me with and giving subs to Self-Titled, to Ghost Girl, and to Bumble and Buzz Me. Thank you so much. Again, Duke, you are far too kind.
Thank you, Duke.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We've had some really good discussions about Aspec relationships, about demisexuality, and all the problematic assumptions that come from society, whether it's, amatonormativity, allonormativity, just all the activities, the stereotypical relationship assumptions that the media pushes. We've had some really good discussions around this, and I'd like to thank all the folks here, Self-Titled, Ghost Girl, and Buzbee, for being so open and vulnerable and talking about some really difficult topics. And to everybody who's been in chat today, contributing and bringing up some really valid and important points as well. This podcast, I've learned so much, and I forget the term that you used earlier, Buzbee, but you brought up a term. I think around, I can't remember what it was. I wanted to ask you to type it in the chat.
It's Adfectual.
I'm gonna have to look that up myself.
I can link a couple of pages in the
That would be
chat if you
amazing.
want.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. I don't know if you'll be able to drop them in the chat, but if you DM them to me or message me, I might be able to drop them in the chat.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
So in that glossary link, it's the second entry.
Okay.
And then here's another page on it.
Awesome, thank you. So here's a couple of links. So it's Adfectual is the term. I definitely learned something new today for sure, because I had never heard that term before myself. So thank you so much for teaching me about that today.
Yeah.
So at this point, I think, I'd just like to allow everybody, maybe this time going in reverse order, to let us know where we can find you on Twitch and on the socials, starting with Self-Titled.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me. This was very fun and informative. So thank you for that. Also, I forgot to mention, but my shirt I wore an A shirt today, and it says
That's amazing.
Some say my love is imaginary, but I think it's just complex, and then it's imaginary numbers, just like math.
Yes, I love that.
I got this shirt from a demisexual YouTuber that I follow like years and years and years ago, and I love it, and I wanted to show it off. But me, if you want to find me, I'm at self_titled on like pretty much literally everything. So Twitch, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, like pretty much any like social platform. If you look at self_titled, and you would either find me or I'm not there. But YouTube, all of that. But yeah, I stream on like Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually around like 7-8 o'clock Eastern time, if you want to ever hang out in my streams. And yeah, we do fun stuff over there.
Absolutely love hanging out and chatting Pokemon with you all the time, so highly encourage you to check out Self-Titled. Really wonderful streamer. And yes, if you love Pokemon, you absolutely have to, for sure.
No, you.
All right.
Or in reverse.
All right. And then, of course, the creator of the Fruities stream team that I recently joined, Ghost Girl. Do you want to let us know where we can find you on the socials and everything?
You can find me almost anywhere under the same username with it's a 05. People get it confused.
Hmm.
But thank you all for the fruities that came by, the friends. And thank you for having me on this this stream, this podcast. I am very
Absolutely.
honored because like asexuality is such a big passionate topic of mine. Mental health is a big passionate topic of mine, and helping out other queer people, giving this information is so important, on like so many levels,
Hmm.
to help queer youth. That's what I want to do. I want to, and even adults that don't have this information growing up, they go through life just thinking that something's wrong with them, that something's off, or um, they're just unhappy because society has made these expectations out of them. We need to really talk about these things so people can learn to be happy. Um, but yeah, just thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me come talk and being patient with me.
Of
I'm
course.
also wearing an Ace shirt as well.
Heck yes.
It
We
says
all.
anxious.
I'm wearing one too. It's very faded at this point, but it is actually supposed to be a ace themed tie dye that I created
Hmm.
a couple of years
Tie
back.
dye.
Yes, or as I call tie dyes.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank
for
you so much
this.
again, Ghost.
Tie dye.
That is great. I love it. Thank you so much, Self-Titled, and to Ghost Girl. It's been a pleasure chatting with you both today. And Buzbee, where can we find you on the socials and on Twitch, obviously?
So Twitch, I'm just Bumblin' Buzbee, of course. On Twitter, I'm Buzbee Games. On Blue Sky, I'm just Buzbee. And on Instagram and Threads, I'm buzzbee.ig. And you can find all of my socials and actually a couple of art pages and my Discord and everything like that in my link tree as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for all your contributions today, Busby. I know it was, really some heavy topics that you brought up, and I just really appreciate all your contributions and for being here today. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, everyone.